Welcome back to History with Mr. E. We have a much shorter lesson for today. I hope you guys are all doing well. Today is 24.6 Restoring Peace. January 1919 brought a peace conference to Paris. Started on the 18th day of January in 1919 in Versailles, France. That's that ridiculous palace slash bureaucracy den. And here it was, Europe was in ruins. And they didn't treat this peace conference the way a peace conference needed to be treated. Europe was devastated by the war. Russia was so devastated that communism was taking over. And the conference made little progress to actually bring a good, solid, settled diplomatic peace to Europe because nobody invited any of the Central Powers from the war, Germany, Austro-Hungary, or anyone else, to the conference. The Big Four at the conference is what they're called. The Big Four was President Wilson of the United States, Prime Minister David Lloyd George of Great Britain, Premier George or Georges, or however you pronounce things in France, Clemenceau, and Prime Minister Vittorio Orlando of Italy. They formed there the League of Nations, which was Wilson's main goal. He wanted a covenant to form an international body to keep peace, to outlaw war. But this didn't work. Many nations joined the League of Nations, but then all of a sudden, because of the Monroe Doctrine, where they didn't want, or America didn't want to join in to European affairs at all, because of that Monroe Doctrine, and we felt we were forced into World War One. The Senate rejected the League of Nations, and we didn't join. Now, the League of Nations was still formed, just without the United States backing, which would prove to be a bad idea altogether. A treaty was signed, the Treaty of Versailles, but really these guys spent a lot of their time, having state dinners and going hunting and enjoying the high life of post-war Europe and finding ways to make things bad for Germany. At the Treaty of Versailles, Germany lost all colonies and overseas possessions. They lost the region of Alsace and Lorraine to France. They also lost the Saar Basin. And they had their borders decimated and given big parts of them back to Denmark and Poland. Germany was demilitarized and forced to have an army of less than 100,000 men, which, America didn't have that many men in their army when the war started, but they certainly built up. Their navy and their merchant marine was shrunk to near nothing, and the Rhine River was demilitarized and occupied for 15 years after the war. 15 years of occupation. Germany also had to admit guilt in the war, for starting the war, which I guess you could say they were guilty of that. They, at the beginning of the war, when Franz Ferdinand was killed, they kind of were hoping that a war would start and kind of pushed toward that war. rather than trying to make peace with between Austro-Hungary and Serbia. They were the major military force of the Central Powers also, and they decided that Germany owed $33 billion in reparations. $33 billion, which is just about $17 more than I make a year teaching you fine students. These reparations were paid to all different countries in Europe and to America. Several other treaties followed. Austria and Hungary became separate nations, and new nations were formed. Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Czechoslovakia were new nations formed basically from the ruins of Eastern Europe and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And some nations had their borders enlarged. Belgium, Greece, Italy, Serbia, which became Yugoslavia, or which was part of Yugoslavia or something like that. I have relatives in Yugoslavia, and I don't really understand how their borders worked. And of course, Romania was also enlarged. And then other new nations were formed outside of these treaties: Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Kuwait, Palestine, Transjordan, and Saudi Arabia. Woodrow Wilson left office devastated by his failure to get America to join the League of Nations. When his term in office ended, he had a stroke and died a few days later, which is very sad to me because it takes a lot to bring a nation through a war like that. And so there it is, a fairly unsettled peace. Germany they lost the war, but they were also treated terribly by Europe. All these new nations formed. The map of Europe looked like I don't know, like a plate of food from a buffet where somebody wanted to try everything. Nobody was really happy at the end of the war, except for maybe France and Great Britain and Italy because they won. And the nationalism problems were going to continue on. And Germany, of course, was so devastated and so irritated and so mad at having lost the war that they allowed the National Socialist Party and Hitler to come to power. And rather than creating peace among equals, the Germans were treated like what they were often called the bloody Hun, and treated like a whipping boy, which led in no small part directly into World War II.